Welcome, one and all, to Leadership Stories, where we will dive into the minds behind today's digital transformations. Today, we're joined by Adam Robertson, who has spent nearly 2 decades building, scaling, and redefining the operational backbone of some of the most innovative technology companies today. Adam is head of AI and infrastructure at Lemurian Labs, where he leads global initiatives across infrastructure, DevOps, AI ops, IT, QA, and performance engineering. Before Lemurian Labs, Adams served as vice president of DevOps at Control Plane, and he has led DevOps and MLOps functions at Witness AI and multiple stealth startups, consistently building high performance engineering cultures and scalable AI architectures. Adam is a DevOps thought leader, speaker, and author of Multi Cloud Kubernetes. He was also a keynote speaker for our very own DAS Connect 2024. Adam empowers fellow enterprise leaders to achieve cloud agility, streamline operations, and accelerate innovative innovation through proven DevOps strategies. Today, we'll be diving into Adam's leadership story, honing in on his approach to digital transformation by highlighting some of the many transformations he has led and charting his story into his current role at Lemurian Labs. Adam, it is great to have you here today.
Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Course. So you're not only a leader, but a thought leader as well. So I wanted to pick your brain about what often triggers transformations for enterprises. And for the ones you have led, what was happening within the organization or industry that made that initiative necessary?
Absolutely. I think one common theme across all the digital transformations that I've both seen and been part of is there's just usually a glaring pain point. And it's something that can either be measured pretty easily by a business metric, such as time to market, or your engineering team is moving slower, not hitting its goals, or something along those lines. Or maybe it stems from something in an individual team, like certain processes or technologies are outdated, and there's newer ways to do things, whether it be from an obvious pain point that everyone can see, or maybe it's not immediately apparent. However, there are other options out there that are available that will actually increase some of these metrics. So a lot of times people get comfortable in what they do and they don't realize that there's new methods or new technologies that are available to them. And when that becomes apparent, then a digital transformation is on the table. And those tend to be driven differently than ones driven by immediate pain points, obviously, the priority and such. But the general course of the digital transformation is the same. It's to fix something and to move the needle and to make the business perform better, or make more money, or have certain teams perform better by whatever metrics they're measured by. So that's generally the gist of it. Yeah.
Nice. And what's kind of an example of maybe one you've led and what was happening? What pain point was that transformation addressing?
Yeah, absolutely. There's many to choose. Some glaring ones that really point out is I was working for a company called Pinger. This is back pre-COVID, into COVID, but they had it was an older company at that time, 12 years old. So they had been built upon a lot of practices that were still in use that were 12 years old, which is not necessarily a bad thing in its own right. However, this was a good example of having both reasons to have a digital transformation. There are obvious pain points. When I walked in, I started measuring things that haven't been measured, and I realized that the commit to deploy time, which is a common DevOps metrics, the time from when an engineer commits code to the time it's actually deployed to production, was on average 7 weeks. Now, that is both an engineering and a business problem. Obviously, if you're in a competitive market, time to market matters. And if you see a feature that you want to push out and you know it's going to take 2 months, that's a real problem. uh, they also had a lot of outdated practices and technologies. They were still using bare metal in a data center. Deployments were manual, and they had the throughput on their deployment system was essentially they had two build servers. And so with 60 engineers, that's obviously not going to work.
Right.
Or it is, but it's going to take a long time. So an example there is like an engineer goes to commit code, finally gets merged into a mainline. That may be taking a week, because there's 13 other PRs that are competing for the build time to run whatever tests are happening. Then it goes to a QA team. They reject it. It's been a week. So that engineer has to context switch back to where they were last week to fix the problem for QA. Let's say it passes and it goes to a regression testing environment or full end to end testing and it fails there. It's been another week. So then we have to go back and the engineer has to context switch back 2 weeks ago. You see this as it goes on. It eventually gets to production after 7 weeks. And say some alarms go off that your full table scans on your database have gone up by 300%, and you find the offending query and it's something that one engineer wrote a month ago or 7 weeks ago.
Oh,
They have to go back and fix it then. And so this is obviously has huge impacts on the business, not only on business metrics, but the engineering team having to, have engineers context switch at such great, times of periods of time. It also impacts the mental health of the team. No one wants to go back and review, like, what was I thinking 2 months ago? It's very difficult with that. And I figured that these existed. So it was some really, the, I, there were lots of ways that we can make improvements. And some of them, the choices that we made were both engineering practices as well as technology ones. And I can go into detail about that a lot, but after a year of having identified the most egregious pain points and the most valuable areas to concentrate, we had that metric down to 4 hours, from 7 weeks to 4 hours. So
oh,
essentially, engineers could commit code. It would go through a series of parallelized tests that were able to run a full suite of tests within the hour. And then it was pushed out to a staging environment where full end to end tests were running and essentially pushed out to production within a couple hours of having been committed. So that was enormously fantastic for business and for sales and for all the business side of things in terms of time to market and alleviating those pain points. But it was also great for the engineers because they could write code, they can see the feedback from it almost immediately. If there was a problem, it was still fresh in their head. They hadn't even gone to lunch yet when they were fixing code that they wrote this morning. And the automated CI/CD was able to push it out, see if there's a problem, automatically roll it back. So it had very little impact on end users as well. So overall, just that one small metric change. There was a lot of big changes behind the scenes, but just had a huge dramatic impact on core business metrics, but as well on just the well-being and mental health of all the engineers who just it was just a much better way to exist in the engineering plane, not having to deal with those big long problems that you just wrote 2 months ago versus 2 hours ago.
yeah, definitely. And it's funny that you mentioned it, like the last time, like things were about 12 years old, which is probably the last time they really had their last major transformation because transformations have a long history to them. It's not a static thing. And what we're seeing now in transformations gears more towards AI, whereas before it was the DevOps and it be more agile, more lean. And back then, 7 weeks was probably a great aim. And now it's crazy to see where we've come 4 hours. And I'm sure even with AI, it could streamline that even more.
I
Oh,
imagine so. Yeah. If you look at the
well,
history, remember back in the day, they shipped software updates on CDs and they did it once a year. And then you got to the age of the magical web, and that was dramatically reduced and then reduced more and more. And over the times, the expectation is drastically shifted. And if companies don't go through these digital transformations with regular intervals, they get left behind.
yeah, yeah, that's such a great point. What inspired or motivated you personally to lead this kind of transformation, though?
A couple things. One is I noticed the effects of A, not doing it, and B, doing it incorrectly, because everyone realizes that if there's a pain point, some organizations are more comfortable than others just waiting and saying that's just the way it is. And that has to do with the culture of the company and a lot of things too, like just general resources. If you're so lean, you can't allocate the resources for a digital transformation. You're stuck, and that's a real bad place to be as a business. But
Yeah.
others just are comfortable being comfortable, and that's the more common thing.
Mhm.
Resistance to change happens quite a bit. I was watching these engineering organizations essentially operating, and just think about it like running with a parachute. You may be capable of running a 12-second 100-meter dash, but you're running it in 20 seconds because you just have this parachute attached. And if I come to you and say, how about we unattach the parachute? It's obviously a simple example, but you could run significantly faster.
Right.
And yeah. And It could be a resource contention issue, it could be a money issue, it could be just a knowledge gap, and that's actually one of the biggest ones with newer emerging technologies. As we move on, not only do digital transformations happen faster because of just new tooling, which actually increases the human component of resistance to change because things are coming too fast, right? There's not small incremental changes over long periods of time. It's larger changes over shorter period of time, which is harder for people to deal with. But you, you're if you can overcome some of those things, right? You find the budget for it, you find the headcount, and you actually get everyone to rally behind the idea. Then you just started. That's the unfortunate thing because then the second half is actually how you plan it and execute it. But personally, like I find an immense amount of joy from actually going through these transformations and seeing what happens to the people that are the actual stakeholders for that. So for the Pinger example, excuse me, watching the engineers just light up when I first did a demo. I was there for a month and I did a demo for the whole engineering team. And what I decided to do is take the web front end product and I just worked with one of the ICs there and grabbed the whole set of code and basically built a CI/CD pipeline that would we did one change, it would actually run, rebuild in 4 minutes, and actually deploy to an S3 bucket, right? So it wasn't on the main line, it didn't actually interrupt our normal operations. But I demoed that to the whole company, and sorry, I'm just gonna get a quick drink here.
No, go ahead. Mhm.
I demoed it to the whole engineering team, and basically, I started the process. I'd made a commit with just having changing a period to a comma, something really simple.
Yeah.
And then on the background, I had the full CI/CD pipeline running with updates, and they were just watching as I was talking about what was happening. And within 5 minutes, I had redeployed, and I went to the other tab and refreshed, and they saw that the comma had changed to a period or whatever, and they were like, "Wait, just back up." They just couldn't believe it, and I was like, "Yes, this is possible for everything." And just they lit up and smiles, and they just from then on, it was like, "Hey," like it was a line of every engineering team wanting to be a part of this, and just seeing how much they were just genuinely happy just with the changes because it made their lives easier. And a lot of the common pain points that they had been maybe voicing repeatedly to their managers over time, or just maybe keeping silent and just not having a good time while doing their work, were alleviated. And that just made them extremely happy. And that's just fun to watch. And then from a business perspective, I'm most of the startups I've worked for, I'm a shareholder, and increasing that share value matters. What that means is alleviating those pain points so you can have a more iterative engineering team meeting your business goals. And at the end of the day, that's going to facilitate a sale or IPO or something in those in that. So it's it's both the personal and business side of gratification from watching these digital transformations go through. And also, I just like tech. I like it. It's fun. I like playing with new things. I like building things. Take apart the toaster when you're four, kind of thing. Uh, yeah, it definitely puts me at the forefront of technology and different processes and ways of doing things. And I can really experiment and get the full pledge of what's happening in the industry and take a look at it and say, hey, how can these new technologies help my engineering teams succeed faster and better?
Yeah. And it's so interesting you brought up that once you introduced this change that it really made people's lives easier because I know a lot of organizations are afraid to take that first leap because change is difficult. And especially if you don't have the right thing, you can end up going through a change and then, oh, by the time you're done with this transformation, if you do make the wrong choice, you have to do it again. And then now these engineers get what's change fatigue.
Oh yeah.
So you do it right and you get to see them and they're like, oh my God, this change actually makes my life easier. Makes, I'm sure, all of the difference. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
no problem. Speaking of different transformations and choosing the right approach, every organization is different. And I was wondering if you could help me situate this organization Pinger in the larger and give us some information about it. Can you tell me describe the organization and the environment at the time, its scale, its technical maturity, maybe it's the biggest operational challenges so we can situate it in the larger context for its transformation?
Yeah. A lot of it was just everyone when I got there, one of the things I do at almost every company I join is I start to interview people, and not just leaders, but ICs and everyone in between. And literally the questions I ask is, "What's the most frustrating part of your job?" And then you write that down, and then you boil it down to the top 5, and that's where you set your targets. So that allows you to differentiate that particular organization from others. There's some commonalities,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
typically you're gonna get the all the ICs to spill the tea, and that's actually a much better indicator of the problems than, say, from management. And that's the honest truth is you can see I'm just real frustrated when I start a build and I come back and it's been 4 hours and it's still running and I've got nothing to do. And so I figure out something to do and then the build is finished and I have to go switch back. And it's just, yeah, no, I get that. Interviewing actual individual people is a real strong way to find the biggest pain points. In Pinger's instance, the commonality there was that the context switching with weeks in between, the manual processes, because you're doing a digital transformation, not just for the engineers, but also the support teams, right? The DevOps teams that are going to be doing the actual CI/CD and the deployment, the operations teams that are monitoring the deployment and have to deal with what happens in the instance that I mentioned about the database, start doing full table scans post deployment. What do they do? And if it's something that is 5 p.m. on a Friday, they're stuck there for the next 2 hours doing a rollback. So if you're able to identify the pain points across all the organizations and then boil them down, you find some commonalities. And usually it revolves around a certain technology or practice. It's really, I'm oversimplifying it, but it may be something like here's how we do deployments. We get a tar ball from engineering and we SCP it to this. And it's just, you do what? Like, this is not like I just had to check my clock and make sure it's still the 20th century, 21st century. Sorry. Because I was confused for a minute here that you're using engineering practices from decades ago. Other organizations I've gone in and they actually are still using some Amazon practices from when Amazon first started in 2008. They're actually like printing out AMIs and deploying AMIs individually. And if they have to make a change, they have to restamp out an AMI and it takes hours to make any small change, right? These kind of older practices and as well as the technology that's available to them, right? A lot of people, the biggest transformation that I think everyone has recognized in the last 10 years is moving containerization, whether it
Yeah.
be moving to actual individual containers being managed by, say, Docker, which does not scale, or when you start to move to container orchestration like Kubernetes, which obviously does scale. But with that it presents a huge amount of other problems, which is you're not just changing the way you do things. You have to fundamentally understand the change in which the environments in which you are deploying to. Like one of the biggest things that I think when I was at Pinger and I was moving them to containers from essentially bare metal was they just didn't understand. They're like, oh, I logged into the server and made this change. And I was like, it's gone. And they didn't understand why. Because the container restarted. He's, oh, that's bad. No, that's by design. And you have to actually go and educate all the stakeholders about the different changes and just that in it of itself is really hard because you have engineers of all types. You have young ones who are very excited to
Mhm.
learn new technologies and they soak it up like a sponge. You have people that are 30-year careers and they have no interest in learning anything. And you begrudgingly have to coax them into understanding why this is a good idea. And, and you just have some engineers that are you know what? You know best. I'll do whatever you want. And then there's others that say, you know what? I know best and I'm not going to do what you want. And you just have to, the human element is actually one of the most difficult parts of any transition. Going back to your question, the specifics is in Pinger had all these. And so I had an operations team that had managed bare metal servers and done manual deployments. I had engineering teams that were used to very manual and a full QA team that these two together had this the 2 week cadence was supposed to be a deployment every 2 weeks. Oftentimes, that was slipped significantly because of delays in manual testing. Some of the things that we're able to do there is gear the QA team to creating more automated tests. And then the argument there was testing already takes 2 hours. And I'm like, that's because you only have two build servers. So I moved the entire build system to Jenkins on Kubernetes and instantly our Kubernetes cluster could have hundreds or thousands of simultaneous builds. So there's no more queuing up and waiting in line for someone else's build to finish. The second you did it, it would basically launch new workloads and it can do it in parallel. So there were 7 different stages of testing that used to be serial, and we can actually parallelize them all at once and you would have immediate feedback. So basically your entire build time was just really the longest set of tests. And once we went through that phase with the engineers of saying, okay, we're going to parallelize all these tests, unit tests, integration tests, like regression testing and all that stuff. And then saying, okay, actually, how about this? How about the longest one right now is the 20,000 unit test that you guys have. Let's break that up into 4 sets of unit tests that we can run in parallel. Because why not? They're unit tests. They can run in parallel. So all of a sudden you just keep shrinking it down. And then all of a sudden your build time goes from 2 hours to 20 minutes. And engineers light up at that. Then all of a sudden you're starting to gain some momentum here, right? And it is all you've done really is implemented a new technology and implemented a different strategy. Engineers actually don't really have to do much. DevOps was writing all the Jenkins scripts. And so, yeah. So we basically, that was low hanging fruit for us to actually do. The DevOps team was responsible for writing the Jenkins file and we would show the engineers what we did, but the engineers just kept doing what they did. And all of a sudden their build times were reduced by 6x. And that helps you not only have faster build times, quicker feedback loops for the engineers, but you're building momentum, you're gaining trust. The engineers are seeing that you're actually doing work for them. They start to appreciate you more. Then they start to say, what else you got in that little bag of tricks? Just, yeah, shrinking down our total time for our CI build time. Then we went on to automate the deployment to where it actually at the end produced a tarball that was then put up into Artifactory. And then there was basically on the other side, there was more build scripts that were able to take that, explode it out, build a container, put it up to Docker Hub, and then our running environment actually it was constantly scanning for updated container images. So now all of a sudden, once all the tests were passed, you had maybe a 15-minute window where it just shot out to production. And then they were just like floored because they get these messages like your code's been in production. And they're like, it's only
Yeah.
been 3 hours. That's right. Little wins like that, where in the beginning you front loaded on the DevOps side because we're the experts. We know what we're doing. We know that this is going to have a pretty dramatic effect. And it's minimal work on their side. So they don't have to interrupt their flow too much. But then they start to see the benefits. When they start to see their build times going down, their actual commit to deploy times being reduced significantly, which the benefits are something we talked about before. Faster iteration loops, they get their stuff back when they're still thinking about it, this kind of thing. And from there, you just start to build momentum. Then you can start to actually say, let's identify some of the engineering practices that might need some improvement here and start to work with them on how they can improve and change the way that they operate to facilitate more wins. They're much more amicable to that after we're seeing some wins on your side they're just like, okay, like I actually believe these guys are doing what they do and it's benefiting us. And like, they don't have some agenda. It's at the end of the day, it's just win after win. And these small incremental wins build trust. And that's exactly what happened at Pinger. And like after that year, when we had a pretty solid set of automation in place and our business metrics were looking good, we even had some of the engineers started writing a blog and they call it the DevOps Man blog. And they were like literally every 2 weeks writing these stories and sending them out about the relationship with engineers and DevOps. And I'm not kidding. I kept on to them because it made me almost cry because I was like, oh my gosh, it's so funny. Just one of the engineers just likes doing this kind of thing. And he started writing it. He'd send it to the whole company and talk about the different wins that we had every month. So we definitely got it. And from the operations side, a lot of them, that was one of the biggest struggles because they were very used to this particular team was very seasoned, 20 plus years operating on bare metal, and to bring them over to more cloud practices to operate on containers, that was more difficult. So what we did is we started buying them courses, Kubernetes courses. They got their Kubernetes operator certificates, and they started going to class that we paid for, and they started to see the benefits of it. And then we sat down and we'd have little workshops about doing container design and how to write Docker files. So we invested in their education. And in the beginning, it was slow. They had high level of resistance. And when they started seeing these wins and the engineering team was getting behind it, and the engineering team was like, hey, we want to do this. All of a sudden, they realized, okay, there are benefits to this. Everyone wants this, and we can't just hold on to the old way of doing things. We didn't want to go the route of mandates. I think that's actually one of the worst things you can do. Just tell people you need to do this because I said so. Having them understand the reasons why, right? Having good solid understanding of the problem is really important. Having a good set of requirements that are not being currently met, like saying, hey, we're actually going to say our commit to deploy time needs to be under a day. You can't just tell them that. You have to make them understand why it's important. Once and they have to see the benefits, right? That's just a big thing. Understand the reasons why, see the benefits, understand all the requirements for it, and also see what it's going to take. If you tell them, how long is this project going to take? Oh, it's going to take as long as it's going to take. No one likes that. You want clear, thought out milestones with individual goals, right? If you just try to think of the whole problem, it's going to take 18 months. It's overwhelming. People are not going to enjoy that thought process at all. Good planning, breaking it down into small problems, celebrating small wins gets people along the ride for you. And I think that's real important to understand the human element of any transition.
Yeah, definitely. You have to celebrate those small wins because otherwise people get lost in all that change and all of the retooling and I feel like the problem that they face in being a mid-sized company with a lot of these like pockets of legacy systems, of fragmented tooling, it's it's a lot to bring that to scale because maybe they scaling it isn't always the thought that people have. It's how do we get by day to day? And then you realize you get bogged down in that, and now it's like, "Okay, now we're shaking things up." And so, definitely being able to celebrate those small wins is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, how did you and your team decide on the focus for the transformation?
Yeah. And it's a difficult thing. And I think that experience is invaluable in this because while every company is different, every engineering team is different, there's patterns that transcend. And I think that is something that you start to see your senior DevOps and other leaders that have been around. They understand that. And that's why DevOps practices and principles are very agnostic and they're built that way for a reason because we don't want to generally have DevOps practices and principles be applied to only one scenario. You want to be able to rely on them on for any scenario. This is the same way the US military trains certain exercises that will work in any battleground in the world, right? And that's the idea. You can't just train for one war. Just like we can't train for one company because you need to understand you need to have a deep understanding of the problems that they're trying to solve, but you
Mhm.
also need to generally not go off in the woods and try to do something that is just one off completely for that company because that causes problems too, right? You have people that leave that have all the data, the stuff in their head. You have new people coming in, and this is so proprietary; they have no way to understand it. So you want to apply kind of common themes and common patterns that
Mhm.
most engineers recognize. So there's a couple components to it. One is make sure that you do understand the problem that what you're going to do is going to solve it. That's a big one. One is to make sure that you have all the requirements from all the stakeholders, whether it be business, operational, or engineering, and something so simple of what metrics are important that we measure and what is the delta that you want to see in these metrics. So you take a look at all the requirements, you look at the problem set, and then you don't go to a solution. You don't look at a technology as a solution, saying, oh, the goal is to be on Kubernetes by next year. That's not a goal. I would never support that. No, the goal is to be on a orchestration platform that is scalable and elastic, it's
Yeah.
self-healing. Like Kubernetes is a technology.
Yeah.
You make sure that you set up goals that are accomplishing the requirements, solving the pain problem, and are not based on a technology or anything. And like solution is like almost the last phase. And then once you actually decide, okay, stakeholders have all contributed their requirements. We have a good solid understanding of the problem. We understand where we want to be at the end. We call it usually the North Star or whatever. It's called different things. But once you understand that, then you can start to prioritize. And that's based a lot of things, and it could be different in one company in one stage, and then that company a couple stages later. Let's say they're post Series C. and they do have a team of 100, all of a sudden you've got very different problems than you did a year ago when it was a post Series A with only 25 people, right?
Yeah.
So you do have to take a step back and examine the whole thing. So I rely on just my experience having done this a lot in a lot of different verticals. I've done it in medical, gaming, finance, now AI, different sets of goals for that, what market you're in, what stage of the company you're in. And so there's no golden reference material to look at. Generally, the way I do it is I prioritize things on the severity reported by the people, right? That's a big one too. How does it affect your daily life? If all the engineers say the top three things, then that's a pretty common thread amongst them. That's a pretty easy one for us, right? You can say, okay, well, I believe that solving this particular problem that every single engineer listed as their top three will result in A, B, and C, like business metrics that actually map to real change. And
Yeah.
usually business metrics are the ones that drive the most, because if you're looking for approval from a VP, that's the metrics they're going to look at. Just if I came to any executive saying, "Oh, I want to use Kubernetes," I'm like, why? No, that's a goal. We just want to be on Kubernetes.
Right.
I get laughed out of there. Like it just never. That just wouldn't work. So having a good reason, like understanding the why, is a really good one. Tying it to direct business metrics that will actually move the needle, and also there's a human component too. What is your engineering team as it exists now capable of?
Hmm.
Now that is also what they're capable of now, and what they're capable of with perhaps additional training. So when Kubernetes came out, everyone's like, "Yeah, no Kubernetes." No, you don't. Because like when you start to drill down, people just think it's a container orchestrator. They don't understand things like operators or CRDs or any of the really complex things that come with Kubernetes, let alone if you like, you just ask a question, okay, how do you want to do your inter app communication? And they're like, the same way we did it before. Why? You're on Kubernetes.
Yeah.
You have a totally different paradigm of inter app communication and pod architecture, and if you're going to use a service mesh and which one and why, if you're going to have a different CNI for your network interface, like all these different things. And that's overwhelming to a lot of people, right? And so you have to look at the existing team that you have, and two things matter: what their existing technical knowledge is and what they're capable of learning. And I don't mean this in terms of like cognitive, actually, do they have the time? Is there a budget? These are important things because if you think a certain solution to a problem is a very technically advanced, newer technology, and you say this will solve all of our problems, but your engineering team is way back here and you've got no way to catch them up, that's not a viable solution in the least. Right.
Right.
And actually, you've just wasted a lot of people's times because it's literally saying, yeah, you know what? I want this person to run a 40 yard dash. And they're like, she's two. Like, this not going to
Right.
happen. That's a waste of everyone's time. That's a good example there of what some of the things that you have to examine. And it's on a case by case basis. And sometimes I'll just admit it, you get it wrong. And most of the projects that I run, these large digital transformations, they take a long time and you expect them to. And like I said before, you break them up into individual milestones that are very achievable and you can celebrate small wins. But along there are checkpoints. Are we still aligned with the original goal? Have we gotten any scope creep? Or have we added anything to the project we said we weren't going to add at the beginning? Has the ecosystem changed? Has the company changed? It's entirely possible that you're in the middle of a huge digital transformation. Let's say you're moving from bare metal to the cloud, or you're actually moving everything into Kubernetes. And all of a sudden, you have a product that has to be deployed in a customer's use, actual in their space. And so now all of a sudden, your deployable artifact is not just a container that you put into your own environment. It has to be a hardened container that passes PCI, GDPR, SOC 2. It has to be hardened and like all these security components because it's actually going to be deployed in their environment. So you actually have to accommodate for every operating system on every node, on every different hyperscaler for managed Kubernetes, including bare metal and K3S. And just all of a sudden, your scope has changed. And you may be midway through a transformation that no longer makes sense. So you have to build in checkpoints. And I do this monthly and just be like, hey, listen, let's review the original spec. Let's go back and make sure that the problem is still a real big problem. It still is a priority because it may be that someone found a way to circumvent that problem, or that one particular client went away and that's no longer a use case that you have. And all of a
Right.
sudden we don't actually need to do this anymore. And that's just okay. That's not a failure in my opinion. That is actually a win because you've recognized that you are spending valuable resources, money, and the time of the people on something that no longer makes sense. So having check-ins is an absolutely critical part of any digital transformation.
Yeah, definitely. And you listed a lot of really great, like, different phases. So if you had to maybe summarize, what were some of the key phases or steps that you had in this transformation?
Mhm. I think how you come to recognize a pain point is so vast. Think of it as a massive funnel. It could be from any direction, but the main point is it all focuses on some pain point that usually maps to some sort of business metric. Just an example of, I don't like the coffee. Very simple example. You're like,
Mhm.
okay, that's a problem, but is it really a showstopper? Because other people like the coffee, and really, does that matter? And there's a Starbucks across the street. Is it really a problem? Um, and then sometimes you can be like, listen, this is solvable by getting good beans from Whole Foods. Let's just do it. Okay. Like it's a fast one. It doesn't involve re-architecting how we make coffee. That would just obviously be a no. It starts with generally a pain point that everyone agrees is something that should be solved and something that will move the needle if it is solved, right?
Mhm.
Don't spend a huge amount of time solving a pain point that actually doesn't push the business forward. And so that's one key component. And then establish a clear North Star. Where do you want to be? Like, yes, this is a problem. It's just like when people complain a problem but don't have, they just complain. It's like, no, let's actually figure out what would this ecosystem, this business, this organization look like if that pain point weren't there. And that starts to be okay. We talked about elastic and scalable infrastructure, self healing, these kind of components that are really important. And yes, Kubernetes fits that. But establish your clear North Star. And then I would say when you get to the planning, once you actually understand the problem, understand where you want to be, you have all of your requirements gathered from all of your different stakeholders. And this is actually really time consuming. Most people don't think it is, but you really have to make sure that everyone's on board. And here's the reason why. You don't just want to understand the requirements. You also want to give everyone who is a participant in this technology the chance to have a say in it. This is, I can't emphasize this enough. This is actually, I think, one of the subject that I talked about when I was at DASA last year
Yeah.
is stakeholders care about the way that something is implemented and they want to say. So you have to not only get their initial feedback, you have to can get it all together, summarize it, put it back out there and be like, hey, this is the set of requirements. I want everyone to actually make sure this is good. And I actually have people sign off. I actually have most people say, I've read this and I agree. And they just check that little check mark. And the reason why is because they feel like they had a say in it. They're participating.
Mhm.
And also, if someone comes back later on and says, this is not the way I saw it going, you can go back and be like, we talked about this pretty extensively. You signed off on this, and this is the direction. And if the things
Yep.
have changed, that's fine. We can deal with it. But for the most part, that level of like involvement is significant enough to where people feel good about the solution. So you've got all your requirements and good, and then you go to the planning phase. Now, this is the thing where I say this all the time. If I have 6 weeks to build a boat, I'll plan for 5 of those weeks. And the
Yeah.
last week should be going through a tick list and a tick. You should have all of your risks already there. You should have different
Mhm.
contingency plans if something goes wrong, like over plan. And this is the
Yeah.
most frustrating part because usually, especially business leaders or some stakeholders will want to see some quick wins. And a lot of times you're like, we're still planning. Oh, you've been planning for months. Yes, you're welcome. That's actually the point. It's because
Right.
when we start to implement this, it's going to go smooth and it's going to, we've thought of all the risks. We have contingency plans, doing this without any downtime, minimal change to your daily operations. And it's important that you communicate that. And that may be regular check ins with your stakeholders, like a monthly meeting, say, here's what we've been planning over the last month and keep them up to speed. And here's what we're looking at the next month. And we have an estimated start date of this and an estimated completion date of that. And if that changes, that's fine because you're planning, you may have discovered some unknown that you weren't aware of previously. So I think that's important too. Plan more than you think you need to. And then just fill in the gaps and be honest with yourself. If you're missing something, don't just ignore it and be like, oh, we'll figure it out. Get it figured out. That's one of the killers is you get 6 months into a year-long project and you realize you haven't thought about something hypercritical, and that is gonna derail you and add 2 months to the project. Whereas if you had really taken the time to think through it in the beginning and found this risk early and had a contingency plan or even a way to avoid it, you would be on schedule. Play the tape in your head, go through it. This again goes back to experience. When you have experienced transformation leaders that have done this a bunch, you can anticipate timing better. You can anticipate these kind of problems that jump up and have plans for it. And then once you've actually have a good plan and you have a good North Star, the plan involves literally, and I do this on my project plans. I chart out all the milestones. We build tickets in Jira for every single action we're going to need. I have a big project plan in Confluence that actually ties in directly to Jira, and I have all my individual tasks per milestone, and I can see their status and I can see dates. And I check in with my stakeholders regularly, my bosses regularly. We're on time or we're behind, we're going to be able to catch up, or we need to remove this element of it, which was a nice to have just to keep on track, these kind of things. So being really active in your implementation is really important too. And then the last thing I'll say with that is, and I keep going back to this because I don't think it's emphasized enough, is respect the human side of it. Keep
Yeah.
people up to date, keep them informed. Nothing will ruin a relationship and ruin trust than vagueness or not being honest or not being transparent. Trust is something you build over time,
Yeah.
but trust is something you lose in a second, and it'll never be the same again. I think everyone's heard that you take a piece of paper and crumple it up and then you just put it back and you try to even it out. It'll never be the same again. And it's going to take you a long time to build that trust back. So from the beginning, make people feel they're heard, valued, and that you consider their perspective, and then keep them up to date regularly, whether it be in a project plan or a status meeting monthly or what have you. So respect the human side and make sure that everyone is in the know. And then, like I said, just make sure you have regular check-ins to make sure that you're still on track because these digital transformations, they do take time. And make sure you communicate that to everyone that yes, this is a 18th month project. It will take a long time, and we here's the whole plan. You're aware of it, and here we go. And that's it.
Yeah, definitely. I love how you pointed out that you really need to take this time to plan because I think this is where there's a disconnect between business leaders and the engineers and the people running the transformation is these leaders, they're like, we're already a few weeks in. Where are the KPIs? What have we met so far? And it's like, look, it takes a while and it's really hard to measure that progress and showing that the change doesn't come directly from the change can take a while because you're so busy planning it. You also need to make sure that you give time for that human element. So I think it's really great to that you've pointed this out. I know DOS has actually been building a tool that helps that charts the different metrics on team performance. And it's been great to show that progress throughout because people want the KPIs right up front, but there's so much else that needs to be put into place. It's hard to see those incremental changes and measure them. So it's really good that you highlighted these different ways to do that. I You mentioned Kubernetes. I was curious just real quick, what tools, frameworks, or methodologies played a pivotal role for this transformation?
For that particular transformation, it was really the tools surrounding the build process.
Mm.
Uh, and at the time, they were already using Jenkins there, and so I decided to basically upgrade Jenkins to increase its capabilities. The build tool really doesn't matter
Yeah.
whether it be GitHub, GitLab, or whatever. The idea is that you are able to apply some of these North Stars that we have massively parallelized testing going on, all these kind of things. The tool stack doesn't matter but just the requirements do. So that's the point I always get to is people get so wild on tools and they become fanboys. There's certain tools, in my opinion, that doesn't matter. I've written articles on this on LinkedIn, but Kubernetes is pretty solid container orchestrator. It's generally the industry leader. So that was always that always satisfied all the requirements in our North Star. So Kubernetes was huge, but also just the underlying technologies like Docker to actually do the building, packaging of the container images themselves. And then, of
Mhm.
course, all the code itself. It was a PHP shop, and then the JavaScript framework and these kind of fairly simple tools. It wasn't a complex tool chain, so that actually made things a lot easier. A lot of like a different company I worked at where we did a transformation was Flexport, and they had 60 different engineering teams in 15 different languages. So we had to, one of the big things we had to do there was ask an honest question to all the engineering teams about, do we need to, you're the only team using Rust. Is there a real reason you need to be using this? Or can we narrow down our general tool chain to just say PHP, Python, Go, and two others and not have 15, because that the general operational complexity with supporting that many different types was really hard. That's one example of just too much tool sprawl. But overarchingly, I think the big thing is you don't do a tool selection or a solution involving a certain vendor until the very end. And that's, you spoke about planning, but the opposite side of that is rushing. People have pressure, usually coming from above, saying, "Hey, we need this feature out like now." And
Yeah.
my answer to that is, "Okay, I'll get it to you tomorrow, but it won't work." And or it's guaranteed to break about half the time. If you're okay with that, we'll kick it out. And
Right.
no one's ever said okay to that. They'd be like, "How long do you need?" Ah, here we go. So now we're talking. And I always do this, and I think everyone should always under promise and over deliver. If I think something's generally going to take 3 months, I'll say four. And then if I get it in 3.5, hey, look at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Excellent. I good. We have a couple more questions, and then I want to get to your current experience at Lemurian Labs. What actually are some of the biggest technical planning and execution or cultural challenges that you encountered, and how did you address these challenges? How did you address resistance or setbacks along the way?
Yeah. I think the biggest one is that human element. Some things are, I call them mechanically prohibitive. And what I mean by that is funding.
Mhm.
You either got
Yes.
it, you don't. And if you don't, you need this transformation, you got to go find it. That's a different side of thing. Technology is another one. Just up building a Kubernetes cluster is beyond easy. It's click ops at this point. You go to Amazon, you can create a Kubernetes cluster. Like a lot of these things are mechanical in nature and very straightforward. The biggest resistance I've gotten, I'll say in a distant second place, is some like business metrics. So one from finance being like, this is too expensive. The other is we can't allocate the resources,
Mhm.
meaning our engineers are busy. Like you can't interrupt them. I get that more than anything.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like they've got really aggressive goals and we need every engineer on board. So we can't do this. From that, you start to figure out ways, like I mentioned with the pinger story of doing all this stuff in the background and just presenting it to the team. And all of a sudden they're real excited to spend time on it after that. And then with resources is also just the funding of it, but also the training of the people. If we don't have a way, we don't have LinkedIn Learning or we don't have Lennox Academy, and those are all solvable problems. It's really time is the biggest thing. Can you take engineers' time away from certain tasks and onto upskilling to be able to use the new technology that we want to be able to do a digital transformation towards? And so from the business side, that can be a problem. That usually happens way early when I go in and do a proposal. uh, I usually try to address all the potential issues early, because if those don't get solved early, there's no point in even going any further, right?
Yeah.
Pushback from the business side is usually fixable, accomplishable, because you can make a case for it. And usually you
Yeah.
do that with metrics that really matter to them. Things like time to market, things like how efficient are our engineers, how much time do they spend on churn, essentially reopening or setting bugs to code that was months old, these kind of things. And if you can tie that back down to business metrics, you usually make a pretty solid case. And that alleviates business concerns. I will say that's an art form because you also not only have to put those measuring, like you have to measure those statistics early to be able to present them to your business. So you have to plan ahead, but also you got to have a certain charm about it. You got to make sure that people like you. You got to make sure that people believe in what you're doing. Otherwise, they're like, I've been accused before. I'd be like, you just want to play with new tech. And while that is true, it's not the reason we're doing it. And so you have to make sure you're not selling. That's the other thing is this is a very logical business decision. Can we
Mm.
proceed to the next phase? Yes. Okay, cool. Next phase is actually, like I mentioned before, actually making sure the problem that you're trying to solve is a problem that people want to solve. That's a
Mhm.
huge one because if you come in and be like, hey, I want to start implementing X, Y, and Z, and everyone's like, why? We just don't care. And could be that they don't understand the ramifications or the benefits from making this change, and in which case you have to do a really good job of informing them without trying to sell them because people
Yeah.
can tell when they're being sold.
Mhm.
Uh, and and if that's the case and you get overwhelming resistance in terms of people saying we just don't want to do that, you may have to go another route. And it may be something like, I'm going to pick something that I know that they want solved. It's not as business critical at this moment, but what it will do is show them that we're here to help them. They'll see the benefits from this one small thing and they'll be like, hey, I like this. I want more of this. And then they'll be more amicable to greenlighting what you originally wanted to do. So there
Mhm.
may be some, and I don't can I wouldn't consider it sneaky or conniving. I think it's strategic. You have a goal and a function. Oh, God. You have a goal and a business function to alleviate problems and make life better for your engineering teams, and you're doing that, right? And if it takes smaller wins for non-critical problems to basically win the hearts and minds, then that's what you got to do. That's
Mhm.
exactly why I went over to Figure when I demoed the web product. Like most of the backend engineers and the mobile engineers certainly didn't care, but they saw the benefits and it's something I could do in a month and just knock it out. And then all of a sudden everyone was behind it. Right. So that was a way for me to get everyone on board with the idea of this digital transformation with low hanging fruit that largely didn't affect them. But at the end of the day, they saw the benefits. They're like, I want in on that. That's one strategy to deal with buy-in for there. But let's say you have buy-in and you're good to go, and people start to realize the changes that it's going to inflict upon them, what they're
Mhm.
going to have to change with their daily schedule, or a very simple one. Here's a very simple one. I moved recently, Lemurian Labs. I didn't want to support multiple platforms for laptops, so I moved everyone to Macs,
Mhm.
and there was resistance, and I had to work with people to figure out why. And at the end of the day, every argument they had was valid for them, but not valid in the grand scheme of things. And just saying to them, "Oh, I'm doing it to make my life easier for managing our fleet of laptops," I said, surprisingly, not very convincing. But getting them on board with saying, "Hey, we're building all these tools for Mac, and it like we Dells tend to lose value, and they also you were building containers on the ARM brand." You just started going all the technical reasons, and you can do this, and still won't convince them. But after a while, it's just it comes down to trust too. Like
Yeah.
they trust that you're making the decision not just for your reasons or the wrong reasons, but overall. And most of the time, they end up being like, "Yeah, okay, I don't like it, but I'll learn." Okay, cool. So you have to be really aware and of the people, the stakeholders is what they're commonly referred to, but they're people. Like, you're going to affect their daily life, and you may understand that
Mhm.
you're affecting their life for the better, but they may not see it that way. And everyone knows the old saying, "It's going to get worse before it gets better." That's a hard sell. But if you're
Yep.
able to show them that, the biggest resistance I've ever had is engineers, just straight up the
Yeah.
individual engineers, and it usually comes from engineers that are the smartest. And yeah,
Yeah.
I know. And it's because, what the way they're doing things works for them and it has been working. And even if you sometimes show them the benefits of making a change, they're just not comfortable with it. And I've had engineers straight up just look me in the face and, "No, I'm not going to do that." And I say, okay. The way that I've come around that is I start to actually implement changes for teams around them and for people
Mhm.
around them. and all of a sudden, they, I don't want to use terms like they get left behind, but they see the benefits and other people get accelerated, other teams start to iterate faster. And essentially it gets to a point where it's almost incontrovertible. They just can't say the benefits are all around, the business metrics are popping off and people are happier and they're still doing things the same way. And all of a sudden now it becomes a very hard, it's very hard for them to say no.
Mhm.
But I don't like it to get to that point. I like people to establish trust with people early. Let them know that you are there to help them.
Mm.
You show them that you are capable of doing that. That demo with the web product was more than enough to get everyone to be like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. He's been here a month, clear wins. I'm on board.
Yeah.
And another strategy I use is evangelists. So usually I can identify pretty early on engineers that just like new tech. They like working with it. They come to you and be like, "Oh, can I do this?" Yeah, you can do that. And all of a sudden you've got an evangelist on your side who
Yeah.
already has a trust dynamic with other engineers. They're going to trust them more. They've been working with them for months or years. They generally have a good relationship and you can rely on that. You don't have to trust me right away. I worked with engineer A and he's very happy. And engineer A writes something saying, "Hey, I did this. It's awesome. Everyone should be doing this." All of a sudden, a lot more people that were initially resistant and you didn't have maybe a good trust dynamic with them
Mhm.
now are on board. And
Yeah.
that's a big thing. At Lemurian Labs right now, I've been here a year and I have just a supremely great relationship with the engineers. Like I don't have to convince everything's not a battle. It's,
Mhm.
hey, this is something we're going to start doing. Here's why. Here's the problem it solves. Here's how it's going to affect your life. And what I get and when I announce that on Slack is just 1,000 of these. Okay, cool. Yeah, we're good to go. It's because I spent the time really establishing good trust relationships with all the engineers to let them know that what I'm doing is for their benefit. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all shareholders. It's going to move this company forward to achieve
Mhm.
our goals. And
Yeah.
so that's a huge thing. So the people element is always the biggest resistance. And if you go about it the right way and if your intentions are good, then, that's something you can solve. And then you get to a really nice nirvana spot where people just trust you. You can go about your life and they can go about theirs and you know how they're going to react. So you can preemptively, like load what you're going to say with things that you know that they want to understand. And all of a sudden now these are no longer things you don't look forward to or dreading. They're not difficult conversations. They're informative. Hey, this is a problem I've identified. This is what we want to do. And this is what it's going to take from your side. This is what the outcome is going to look like. And once you have those good relationships, it's kind of like, awesome, man. This is so cool. Can't wait to see it. Love that.
Awesome. The absolute irony, we can't hiring someone onto a transformation, then saying, "Oh, we actually can't have you use our engineers. They have a lot of deadlines, and yet you're gonna help them bring that commit to deploy time from 7 weeks to, like, 4 hours." I'm sure there's a lot of expectation management there and just really
Yeah.
ju
And you have to not have an ego and you have
yeah,
to, and the only word I can really say is you have to be charming about it. You have
yeah,
to, people, if you're just a jerk, you're like, this is the way it has to be because I'm right. And I did this before and it worked. Just trust me.
right,
Like, no one's gonna get out of here, dude. You have to make sure. And it's about big relationships and trust. Like I say this a lot because it's really true. If you're gonna go in and if you go to a brand new mechanic you don't even know and it's gonna be $1,200 and you're like, that's it? What's the problem? What broke? What are you gonna like all this
right.
stuff? You don't know this person. But if you go to the same mechanic for 20 years across 4 cars and he's like, oh, yep. He's oh, I found it. I can probably knock that out for 800 and I'll be ready tomorrow. And you trust the guy. Okay. Yeah. It's a different dynamic.
Yeah, definitely trust plays a huge role in that. We're gonna wrap up with this transformation, and then I'm going to pivot a little bit, but to summarize it, how did you measure success and what were the measurable outcomes or results of this transformation? Just a quick summary.
Yeah. At the end of the day, this is a business and business metrics kind of rule. And I do differentiate business metrics from engineering KPIs. But at the end of the day, engineering KPIs drive business metrics, right? So focus on developer productivity is the biggest one. and developer satisfaction, which is a very close second, but it matters because then you get people that are enthusiastic and they're happy and they feel valued, and that's important too. But so some important things, we have the classic DevOps metrics I've mentioned already: the commit to deploy time, the deployment frequency, our feedback loop systems. How quickly can they get feedback from code they've just put in? Like I have a rule at Lemurian Labs that our build times can't exceed 10 minutes because that's enough time to go grab a coffee. And by the time you get back, we want results. And recently there were like I've alerting and put in place to see if it goes, and like one build took 22 minutes and we made a full investigation as to why. And that matters. Keeping those metrics top of mind like are important, and making sure that the metrics that you are going to measure that identified a problem in the beginning are the same ones you're going to measure at the end to make sure that you have a delta that is in your favor. And
Mhm.
so most, especially finance leaders, they care little about feedback loop time of an engineer. What they care about is productivity of that engineer and actually how quickly they can get out features, because that has a direct impact on business metrics. So you have to not be not schizophrenic per se, but you have to make sure that when you're talking to certain people within the organization that you talk about the metrics they care about, and the metrics that drive changes, or sorry, the underlying metrics that drive changes to the larger business metrics are important, but they don't necessarily have to be surfaced to the business leaders because they don't care. It's if I want you to run a race in 10 minutes, I don't care what shoes you wear. Just wear the shoes that work for you to run this race in 10 minutes. And the shoe selection is going to happen behind the scenes. And yes, the shoe salesman cares and the runner cares. But once you've established that, then you can actually look at how it changes your business metrics. So time to market is a really important one, commit to deploy. And even bigger than that, you have to take an understanding of when product has decided to move forward with something, how long that takes. It's not just product, it's actually the design and have an agreed upon design phase of it, right? And then
Yeah.
actually getting it to engineers. That is something that DevOps normally doesn't get too involved with, but you can help by making sure they have the right tools like Figma or anything that they may need to communicate effectively to engineers. And that will surface when you talk to the engineers. What's your biggest pain point? Oh, we get these very vague design decisions from product, and we have to do something on our own, and maybe we do it wrong, and they see it and they tell us to correct it, and there's all this back and forth. That's a pain point, right? Let's solve that by implementing a better process and better tooling between those two entities to make sure that we can alleviate that problem. Right there, you just identified one. It's easy. And that has a direct impact on your time to market, and therefore it's a pretty big business metric that can be measured and reported over time, saying, hey, we are improving across the board across these metrics, which we agreed upon in the beginning are the most important to you. And then you're able to do that. So keeping that top of mind, I'm a huge fan of dashboards. And every time I've been in a company, we usually have TVs up in there, and I put up dashboards that are ones that executive cares about. And my favorite thing is they're walking by and they're just like, oh, what's that? Oh, nice. No, looking good. Cool. And then they get going and just, yeah. That's a
Nice
really great feeling.
snapshot.
Because all the engineers see it too, and they know they had a hand in building that, and, like, it makes everyone feel good, and so
Yeah.
CEO dashboards, oh, I always create those are the best.
Awesome. No, that's great. And since leading this transformation, how have you evolved as a leader from pinger to now head of AI transformation at Lemurian Labs? What are some of the projects that you're working on now at or in Lemurian?
I would say how I've grown is my time to understanding, I think, is a good way, and that goes across almost all boards. Time to understanding problems. I can usually walk in and understand just from seeing the technologies they're using. From my experience, I know that there's certain problems that arise when using those technologies. Same thing with practices, like identified the manual processes and know that those are such low hanging fruit that you can automate. And this, especially in the with AI agents coming, it's a new frontier of being able to automate things that previously were not automatable, which is
Mhm.
great. So being able to identify things quickly. Also, just prioritization. Understanding that you're not gonna come in there and tell everyone how it is, and I'm gonna change this. No, you're not. The first thing you gotta do is start to understand the people, get good relationships with them, and that's something I do from the get-go. Day 1, my
Mhm.
goal is to meet every single one of you and understand what it is that's important to you. So, those 2 things are, I think, hyper crucial in the beginning when you enter. a new organization is just very quickly identifying the most important ways to spend your time, building trust relationships with the people, understanding the technologies and therefore the problems. Like
Mhm.
those are big. As as I mature in my career, I'm able to do that a lot quicker. I realize what works. I'm able to identify, say, certain types of individuals that are more prone to speak up and offer resistance and really work on spend extra time with them to make sure that you can build a trust relationship with them faster.
Wow.
Um, and also just your intuition just gets better. It's as you're going through these, you start to see things pop up. Oh, I've seen this before, and it leads to a big deal. Let's nip it in the bud now before it becomes a big problem. That's huge. You can't teach that. That's something that just comes with experience, and that's a huge one. I think I alluded before that you keep these kind of DevOps practices and principles very agnostic, and the reason why is because you can generally, once you get used to applying them in multiple different organizations and different verticals with different people, you get really good at applying them in any new situation. So
Mhm.
you start to identify things that are like someone comes to you with a solution and you're like, that's not scalable. You just okay, that'll work for yeah. One of my favorite things is I'm like, add 2 zeros to that every time. Okay, like that'll work for 1,000 containers. Add 2 zeros to that. And they're like, okay, we're gonna need to do this. All right, add two more zeros to that. And it's there's no way we're gonna have 10 million containers. So I'm like, yes, there is. I want you to design for N containers, not 1,000, not 10,000, not 10 million. N. Doesn't matter how many. Because fast forward, Lemurian is like pretty early in our stages right now, but let's say we've got 50 clients that are running 10 million containers each. Okay, now we're talking about some scale. Then we have to design for that. These kind of things you recognize early so they don't become a problem later on. So I think that just takes experience
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Oh my, amazing. I feel like that theme trust keeps popping up, and I'm I dove into a bit of what you're doing at Lemurian Labs, and your current role there focuses on democratizing AI and reducing energy costs by of AI training by 100 times. It, can you explain what that looks like and maybe how your previous transformation experience informs this mission?
Yeah. I think so. One of the biggest things now is everyone knows that the industry has a GPU leader that can dictate how the market goes. And
Mhm.
that actually creates a problem. I think everyone knows that monopolies are bad. And when you have six companies deciding the fate of something so important like AI, it's not ideal. And I don't want to step on any toes here, but I think this is something that is so important, just AI in general, and what it can do and the problems it can solve and how it can advance humanity, that having it be dictated by a select few is generally not in the interest of the public, I think, especially we're in a capitalist society and most decisions are made to support shareholder value, not necessarily humanity and the well-being of its participants. Democratizing AI has to deal with several things. One is just generally reducing the barrier to entry.
Yeah.
These NVIDIA chips are very expensive. They're also very hard to get a hold of. I remember I was working at an AI company where a team's like, hey, we need this particular instance type from Amazon. It took me 3 weeks to find it. I finally found one in Tokyo. And, you
Ah,
know, and yeah, that's a real problem because obviously the engineering team is sitting there, you got it, you got it. And then after 2 days, what's going on? They're nowhere to be found. It just looking on GCP and AWS and Azure, and it's a real problem. So making the tools and the underlying systems that are necessary to facilitate the advancement of AI are important, and we can't gatekeep it. We can't make it so unaffordable that no new startup can afford even a GPU, right? These are these are extraordinarily expensive. Companies like Apple can buy 250 of them for $1 billion. Sure. But a startup that has angel funding of a couple hundred grand can't afford that. And if they want to rent one and they have to wait 3 weeks to get it from Amazon, that's a real problem.
yeah.
We can do a couple things like we make more energy efficient AI. So we start to, because energy is really the problem, right? Let's think about it. Yeah. Microsoft has thousands of AMD GPUs that are sitting there idle because they don't have the power for it. And so that's a big one, is how we can focus on more being more energy efficient. How can we optimize the models to work on that lower power, smaller data types, whatever the case may be, the more efficient node operations to effectively make the same training run or the same inference time cost less. I think that's huge. That it
Mm.
not only impacts markets, it also impacts the earth, because at the end of the day, you're being powered by a data center that takes resources and sometimes takes away from other resources, right? And then being taking advantage of things. So that for the industry, that's one thing, but also if you talk about transformations within a business, I think one of the things we're seeing more now than ever is everyone's agentic AI. I don't think a lot of people truly understand what that means, but AI agents and what they can do. And so how we're applying that at Lemurian is really simple. It's like, what are the tasks that we go through regularly that need automation? Right. So a lot of things that we're used to, the transformation really is the mental transformation from what we've been able to automate over the last 15 years of DevOps, CI/CD pipelines, automated deployment, self-healing for a lot of things. Like these are automated systems, but they're very unique to the technology you're in. If you're going to have a self-healing Kubernetes system, you actually have to have very declarative self-healing steps that are built into your code. And if you start to move that out of that particular system, you have to rewrite it, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
intelligent about it. You have to have a human involved. What if you had a huge amount of infrastructure deployed globally in multiple different clouds? That's a real problem. You're going to need a fairly large team to support, not only to write those automations, but then to keep them up to date and to move them around. The next iteration of that is, what if we had an intelligent AI agent that can detect problems, craft a solution, apply it before it gets even to be a problem? And that's where I
Yeah.
think we're going to see the biggest benefit. Everyone usually associates LLMs with AI. No, that LLM is a large language model. It's a form of it, but it's not the whole umbrella. So designing AI, agentic AI that is able to go in and do a lot of self-healing, a lot of proactive monitoring. Imagine an idea that you actually had push code that opened up a new port to support something like gRPC transmissions. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden your AI agent picked it up. They wrote a monitoring agent for it. It actually updated the monitoring, and now you're monitoring to make sure that port's open without having to do a single thing. All of a sudden now you just have your intelligent monitoring working for that use case. And then it can say, if it's here, let's make sure. And it goes throughout your entire ecosystem and then sees, oh, three other machines have that too. Let's apply the monitoring to them. Not a human was involved. That's going to be the real win of agentic AI, is these kind of intelligent systems that are adaptive and really, you, because humans make mistakes. That's just all the into it. Now, of course, AI does too, but we do our best to facilitate that.
Mm.
Think one of the biggest problems that we're seeing now with AIs is not with how hard it is to build them, but doing things like building them securely. How do we do governance when the agentic AI is making these decisions to say, "Oh, I'm going to start monitoring that port"? Should we just let it do it on without watching it? Just give it all those privileges, because all of a sudden now you have to give it root access to your both your network and to your nodes, and all of a sudden they could do some really bad things without you knowing. So how do we stop that from happening? How do we audit it for things like, if you're in a compliance framework like SOC 2 or GDPR, how are you able to say, because every change that you have an associated ticket with it and an approval. And like that just violates all compliance frameworks when you have an agent going through just making all these changes, especially to production without approval. You would fail that audit in a New York second. There's just, so
Oh,
that's what we're facing right now, is how do you have these autonomous AI agents that have the capacity to really improve all business metrics and make actual individual contributors' lives so much better. They also run the risk of making things really bad. So how do you make sure that there's quality, make sure that there's security guardrails, make sure the observability, to make sure that, God forbid, someone is a bad actor, or slightly less bad is they just didn't accommodate for a use case. And let's say your AI agent goes and launches 50,000 new M24 XLs. And all of a sudden your bill comes from Amazon and it's $4 million. And you're like, wait, what? That's a common thing. You see
Yeah.
people write automation for auto scaling, and then they get an Amazon bill. And the answer to that was put limits on it. Okay, that's a band-aid. Uh,
Mhm.
with agentic AI that actually controls even setting those limits, you have to make sure. Because imagine AI's, oh, we need to add 3 more servers. Oh, I've hit a limit. I'm going to go. AI naturally would assume I'm going to go back to Amazon, raise that limit, and then raise the server count because that's actually a valuable solution to that problem. But that's
Mhm.
a great thing for your wallet.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's just such an amazing mission because you're right. There's so much potential for AI to do great things. And it's great to hear that there are companies out there like Lemurian that are bringing that power to the people. And to put it, not to be too much about it, but really bringing it to these companies, bringing it to these engineers that can utilize it and build with it. And I know recently you have just finalized a partnership. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we've been operating with seed funding for the last couple years, and obviously, with any company, when you want to grow and expand your product, you need funds to do that. Usually, has to do with people. In our case, obviously, it's something we're trying to fix is the expensive nature of owning and running GPUs. So the infrastructure component, which is one of the responsibilities I have here, is how we're going to actually expand our infrastructure footprint and our product offering to support multiple sets of GPUs and such without having we have to buy them essentially. We raised 28 million, remember a variety of people, which is fantastic. Jay worked really hard on the Series A because he wanted to make sure we have the right partners in place that are industry leaders and make sure that the VCs and the partnerships that they bring are valid and really valuable. And now that actually gives us a lot of horsepower to both expand our team because that matters, right? Yeah, we're going to be able to essentially grow our engineering team significantly. From the perspective, from my side, we need to build things that are important, like performance testing platforms, make sure that we're covering a wide variety of GPUs and this performance to make sure we can publicize that to the community to make sure that people can see that we are in fact running the same models on different kinds of GPUs and achieving the same accuracy and performance, right? And so we need to be able to support all sorts of different performance testing as well, and then set ourselves up to be successful with clients. People don't realize that in pre-Series A and Series A, you have to build some things that most people take for granted, like customer service departments or global monitoring systems and these kind of things that they take time and money to build. So the Series A is actually really critical and valuable for us to build all those systems and to make sure we're postured to really take on clients and be successful.
Oh my gosh. Well, congratulations on that really exciting development and wishing the best of luck
Thank you.
for you guys. I want to finish up with two more questions if you have time
Sure.
still.
Yeah.
And just to kind of wrap up the conversation, what do you see as the next frontier when it comes to digital transformation, AI infrastructures
I don't know.
oh,
I'm
coming
sorry.
down?
I do have an 11 o'clock.
Oh, no worries.
We can maybe this
I-
afternoon. Can we finish it or like, how do you want to do this?
Even just saying congratulations on the new partnership is a great. We can leave it at that if you'd like.
Okay. One thing I will say is people think Series A is a great accomplishment, which it is, but actually it marks the start of probably the hardest part because now money is not the thing holding us back. It's solving these problems. So it's when we announced it internally, everyone was very excited. And I was just like, hey, I want everyone to make sure now it's we got the car and the gas. Now we need to hit the gas. And
Yeah.
so this is the critical time where we make sure we hire the right people. That's crucial. We want to maintain our culture. We don't want to slow ourselves down by making the wrong hires. Make sure that
Yeah.
we make the right decisions with what we're going to do with the money. So now that we have the resources, and namely funding, we need to start building really intelligently and we need to essentially step on the gas because we need to produce a product and start getting customers.
Yeah, definitely. Any final words you want to say to future leaders in transformation or
Yeah.
AI? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one big thing is everyone knows the quote, with great power comes great responsibility. With digital transformations, you are at the forefront of making such a core fundamental change for your company. It affects everybody and it affects the bottom line, it affects the outcomes. Treat it as such. Just it's a venerated thing. Make sure that you give it the kind of importance that it deserves and don't do a sloppy job. Don't rush it. Make sure you've crossed every T and dotted your I's and your lowercase J's. It's a big deal. Treat it as such. And it may seem daunting in the beginning. Break it up into small pieces and just get it. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. And remember, you're at the forefront of doing something amazing and everyone's going to benefit from it. The re- Focus on the rewards, focus on the benefits, and keep your chin up, and you'll get through it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Adam. This was really exciting to learn both about the transformation you led at Pinger up until your growth into a leader at Lemurian Labs. Really excited to see what you guys do. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much.